BBC with David Lammy.
I'm joined now by Dan Harris, CEO of Neurodiversity in Business. Dan, thank you so much for joining me. Look, let's explain to listeners first, because terminology changes a lot, what neurodiversity is.
Thanks, David. And that's a really great question to start with, because neurodiversity is a really simple concept. It's a beautifully simple concept, in fact. It's just the concept of cognitive diversity. So rather than us talk about medical models and diagnoses, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, all we really need to think about is that just as you have a slightly different shade of hair than I do, and you may be taller and I may be shorter, why would our brains not be different? Why would we not process information differently?
Right. And clearly what we know is traditionally for people who are neurodiverse, let's take what we would traditionally describe as being on the spectrum of autism or ADHD. How does business accommodate these people? So please help me understand, does business in this country do enough to accommodate and support neurodiversity in the workplace?
Well, David, I'm really pleased to say that we are leading the world in the UK on neurodiversity in business. However, we are starting from a very low state of maturity compared to other areas of diversity and inclusion where we've made good strides or great strides over the last 30 or 40 years. The reality is that neurodiversity still sits in the too hard to deal with bucket in the corporate world. It's viewed by HR as a problem and a challenge rather than an opportunity. And that's why I set up Neurodiversity in Business, David, and why it's been such a big success over the last 18 months, because the big corporates have got together and realized neurodiversity can be a competitive advantage if you do it right.
Give us some examples of how that might work.
Well, I was afraid you'd put me on the hot seat there, David, and you have. Look, there aren't many great examples of organisations who are doing this right, but let me talk to a few that are. So I went up to Barclays in Glasgow a couple of months ago, and I was blown away by the design of their physical office space there. So they have built neuro inclusion into design of their office. So rather than me as an autistic man having to explain to my boss that I need movement breaks, or I process information differently, or I would like this light or temperature at a slightly different level, rather than me having to disclose, David, what they've done is actually they've built that individuality into their entire office setup. So, for example, there are individualized lighting settings and AC. And what was really great, and I'm sure you'd love to visit this one day, is that they had a swing in the office, David. So people who need those sensory breaks and movement breaks, particularly people on the autistic spectrum, they could access that swing without disclosing to their boss why it was needed. So what I really liked about this was that they built inclusion in by design rather than as an afterthought.
And look, we've had some great scientists in our past, great artists in our past, great designers in our past history that have all had neurodiverse backgrounds. So it's self-evident that in the workplace, this could be a huge advantage if harnessed properly. Dan, tell us about your own story. How did you come to this subject, and why are you doing what you're doing to make things better for people who are neurodiverse?
Well, I am an autistic man, ADHDer as well. I've done pretty well in my corporate career over the last 23 years, but my kind of passion for this comes from my little boy. So I have a 10-year-old boy. We call him the Joshy man. He is a non-speaking autistic boy, and I'm projecting forward to the type of society I want him to grow up in. And what I felt, having been in that corporate world for many years, is this could be one area where business actually leads society. Because as much as us corporate folk complain about what the businesses are doing for neurodivergent folk, actually, when you get out into broader society, as you know very well, education, criminal justice, healthcare, those are all areas that people are further marginalised by their neurodivergency.
And tell me, if you're sitting there and you've got a neurodivergent child, you're a parent, probably having struggled with the special educational needs in our country, what's the hope for you that things are getting better, will get better? What should you be doing?
Well, first of all, there is hope because over the last 18 months, Neurodiversity in Business has signed up the top 700 organizations globally. So we're talking the likes of the Google, the Amazon, the McDonald's. Even today, David, Royal London have announced their membership. So it does show that the businesses are standing up and recognizing that they want to become neuro-inclusive. The second point I'd make, David, is that actually the fact that we're talking about this on such a high-profile radio show as yours shows that actually this is a topic that society wants to improve on. So neurodivergent folk are the 1 in 5. We are the 20% of the workforce who are not currently being supported by our employers. So as you know very well, me as a neurodivergent person, I have, people around me, family. So it doesn't just affect me, it affects the family. So I haven't been into a boardroom yet, David, where they have said to me, Dan, no, you're talking rubbish. I don't agree with your mission, etc. Every single boardroom I've been in, they've said, absolutely, we need to be doing more on neurodiversity. How do we do it? How do we cooperate for the greater good? So I think we're absolutely in a period of hope on this.
And does the government not need to step up and improve support for before children reach working age for our young people who are neurodiverse?
Absolutely, and categorically they do. So I myself have been through the battles of trying to secure my son the appropriate educational provision, which is legally mandated in the Children and Families Act 2014. It's a beautiful piece of legislation, David. There's nothing wrong with that piece of legislation. And I am really concerned with the efforts currently underway to undermine that piece of legislation. What I would say is the government has a responsibility both in terms of supporting our neurodivergent children as they get through their education system, because the reality is that neurodiversity in business only looks at adults 18 plus, and a significant portion of our population, of our neurodivergent folk, are being disenfranchised going through education even before they reach the potential of employment. And the final thing I'd love to say on this, David, is that I think government needs to look at the total lifetime cost of an individual rather than having a very siloed approach, having health costs, education costs, social care costs considered as a separate item. If you actually look at the best way to support our neurodivergent children, it's through early identification of their needs, accurate identification of their needs, and then actually putting the provision in place early on rather than gatekeeping and delaying until it's too late to effectively support them.
Dan, it's Christmas. Neurodiversity in Business is a charity. There'll be many people listening that want to support you. How are you doing as a charity, and how can they support you at this time?
Well, that's very generous of you, David. So we are a non-membership subscription charity. So what that means is we don't charge for any of our services. We believe the reason we're around is to make the future better for neurodivergent folk. So in terms of the support that we would like, our website, neurodiversity.org, has details of how you can support us. We have our conference coming up on the 16th of April at Bishopsgate in London. It will also be live around the world. And then lastly, we have our academic research, which are launching on Monday, which will enable people to tell us their true experience of neurodiversity in the corporate space. So any kind of support, and also following me, Dan Harris, on LinkedIn, as well as following Neurodiversity in Business on LinkedIn.
This is LBC.